Well, it seems to me you're very well-rounded, that you've lived a life, up until you got into politics where you got to try a bunch of things, do a bunch of things, be a commoner, so to speak, be one of the people and see what it was really like to start at the bottom, right?
Yeah, I did. I think that's right. I started at the bottom in the economic, there were people poorer than us. We weren't poor. My mother and father were both working, but it was a little 5-room apartment. My brother and I, for a while, shared the same bed. And so I was, in that sense, not a lot of advantages. But I'll tell you what I think is most important for any person, and I hope this is the case. I know it's the case with my daughters, with their mother, because I missed most of bringing up my children when I was gone those years.
Yeah.
But I was rich in love with my parents. We had just such good parents, and they raised you with values. And I could never give in to these corrupt prosecutors, these motherfuckers, because I knew how corrupt they were and how dishonest that was. And my parents didn't raise me to be that way. Better to go down fighting. And I would think about my parents through all the years, the good years and the hard years. And among the reasons why I could never give in, I would think about them. I could never shame them or dishonor them. I'd rather go to prison if I have to. But I was lucky that way. And so I would say that, I was disadvantaged economically. We didn't know any lawyers growing up. There were no doctors or lawyers in our neighborhood. Everybody, the dads worked. A lot of the moms didn't work back then. A lot of moms did. My mother was a working mom. And there was little in terms of, you didn't go to restaurants. It was like so rare because they had to scrimp and save, right?
Yeah.
But on those rare occasions where you go to like a family restaurant in the neighborhood, my mother, I always remember her, she was always insistent on, you eat everything on your plate, son. We're paying for this, right? So you learn certain, realities that I think served me well. And I think shining shoes as a kid, hustling from 9 years old to 13 years old, and you got to make your money on tips. You got a quarter for a shine, and whatever you got was in tips. I think in a weird way it actually prepared me for politics because you just got a sense of how people think and what they're interested in and human nature.
Right. And customer service, so to speak, how to interact with people. How to get a reaction from people. Sure.
I think so, right?
I can understand that.
They didn't teach me that in the math class in high school.
Right. Well, that's true. Okay, so now let's talk about how you really got into politics. Obviously, it sounds like your father-in-law believed that you might be the right one to sort of move forward to get you guys in this arena. So talk a little bit about that.
So Patty and I were happily married the first couple of years. And I was in the private practice of law at that time. I left the state attorney's office, and I was actually very good I was good at getting clients, and I didn't miss a beat. I was just off and running, and I had a lot of clients. It was a working class practice. I represented a lot of people accused of crimes. When I had to explain that to the voters later on, that they should not think I wasn't tough on crime or anything, I would point out, well, I was tough on crime. You should have seen the sentences my clients got. But that was half true. But I had a lot of criminal defendants. I had them in the felony court, state courts, the misdemeanor courts, traffic court. I represented a lot of, I had a practice where I had several clients who were gypsies, and they were recurring business. I would have the grandparents, I'd have the parents, I'd have the children in juvenile court, because a lot of the livelihoods of the gypsy community here in Chicago was, frankly, criminal activity. I had a lot of, but I pursued a general practice with an emphasis eventually on personal injury cases and workers' comp cases. So it was a working class background and a working class practice. And I had a lot of clients, and business was good. And as that was happening, my father-in-law's local politics got complicated. And in Chicago politics back then, being a ward boss, like he was, the alderman, one of 50 wards in the city of Chicago, and being one of the more powerful ones because he was able to have a political organization with a lot of job holders, city, state, and county jobs. And they would go and knock on doors. They're called precinct captains. And the Daley family came up this way, and all the leading political families in Chicago came up that way in the old days. And it turned out that the ward committeemen in the area around him had made decisions on who the state lawmaker was going to be. And he felt emasculated because the guy that was his guy had made a deal with the other bosses, and they had cut him out. And so he was outmaneuvered, and at the last minute he was scrambling to find candidates to challenge that. And he just happened to have a lawyer in the family who kind of grew up in the neighborhood, who he might be, might have might be all right at this. Now, we've both expected to lose, and because all the political leaders were with the other guy who was a 12-year incumbent. And I remember him calling us on a Sunday afternoon. It was cold. It was January. I just got done running. And he had called my wife, Patty, and said, what do you guys do? Why don't you come over to the house? I want to talk to you about something. So we came over. He's got these maps, these legislative maps. He's on the floor, and he says to me, he says to both of us, Ronan left me last night. That was his state rep. I'm looking for a candidate. I got this guy who wants to run over here. I got this other guy that would run for state senator. And I'm thinking about you over here, Blagojevich. That's what my father calls me to this day, Blagojevich. And I looked at that map, and I said, oh, yeah. And he said, look, they're all against us. You're probably going to lose, but you have any interest in running. And I didn't hesitate because I read all those history books growing up as a little boy, which I did a lot of. And this was my one chance to actually get in to that. So I didn't hesitate. And I said, yeah, I just got one question. If somehow I win, am I free to make my own decisions on policy? And I'll always remember his answer. It was not basically, it really was. It was, I don't give a fuck about that. And so we were off and running. And, my name was always ethnically challenged. It's Serbian. But the Serbian community in the neighborhood I grew up and I was running in was not at all of any consequence. Polish was the largest ethnic group in the congressional district I would run in. And in the state rep district, Polish, Irish, German, Italian, Latino, about a third of the district was Latino, which was always a very good vote for me because I could say, mi nombre es difícil de pronunciar, pero espero que fácil de recordar. Por favor, vote por mí. Demócrata. I just said, my name is hard to pronounce, easy to remember. Please vote for me. Democrat.
So is this where people started to call you Blago?
No, that happened after I was elected governor. The Chicago Sun-Times came up with that nickname. Anyway, I went out, and I didn't really know a lot about the issues. I'll always remember the first speech I ever gave in politics was at St. John Birchman's in the basement during a bingo. And my wife, Patty, was with me. And it was this Catholic school that she went to, and her sister and her brother went to. And that was their church. And I was in the basement. I was telling the seniors there that, my wife went to this school and went to this church. And I just want you to know, this is the church and the school I love most in the world. Please vote for me. That was pretty much it. And I went around, and I got $100 for you, for your bingo game.
Oh my goodness.
So I donated $100 for the bingo game. And then I just worked real hard, knocked down doors, went to all the train stations and the bus stops and introduced myself to people. And
did the issues matter? Were you studying up on why you might take one side versus the other? Or that kind of wasn't part of your shtick back then?
Yeah, after a while, I had to figure that out.
Yeah.
Right? Because this was basically a frenetic, maybe it was a frenetic 2-month campaign in the cold. And I was at it every day, and I didn't hesitate to figure out the issues. I just started running. And we would put out these leaflets about my humble origins and that I grew up in the neighborhood real close to this area. And eventually some people would ask me when I'd be at the train stations, yeah, but it doesn't say anything about where you stand on a woman's right to choose or where you stand on, funding for the police and all these other issues. And I said, well, we're going to come out with something like that soon, which we did. We had to. But I pretty much knew what I kind of believed in, and so I would pretty much be able to answer it. What I found knocking on those doors every day, 14 hours a day, was really what people want, is just to feel like their elected representatives are close enough to them where they listen to them and care about them, and maybe they can't agree with you on everything, but is your heart right? Can they discern and sense that your heart might be right for them? And I feel like when political candidates get closer to people like that, not only does it help you win votes, but even more importantly, once you get the office and you win, you remember those people who you met along the way, and when you have to make the decisions, because governing really is about decision making. It's about setting priorities and making choices. And when you have to choose, sometimes even between two things you agree with, but you can't get both of them, but you can get one, and you might have to sacrifice the other. It's always good to think back about those people you met along the way. Absolutely. And for me, I could think about my late parents. I could think about aunts and uncles and people from the neighborhood, everyday working people. And I could then take that and use that as a guide on what might be the right thing to do. So when I was governor and I was able to give free public transportation to every senior citizen and disabled person, that was rooted in my life experience. When I gave health care to all the kids in Illinois, when I had the power as governor, it was rooted in my own life experience and what I saw growing up.
Yeah. So when you first heard that you won, I mean, how did you react?
Yeah, it was, I'll tell you, and I think your listeners might find this interesting. My mother was a widow by then. She was a senior citizen. She was home. And I felt good because I was out there all the time, and I was getting really good vibes from the voters. And even though the guy I was running against was a 12-year incumbent, people didn't know who he was. Most people don't know who their state lawmakers are, which is a problem because this is why they can go down to the state government and be basically, they could be unknown, and they don't have to do the will of the people, but they do their own stuff. But nobody really knew who this guy was, and so I felt good about it. My father was very afraid because the ward bosses in the areas had a lot more of the area than the state rep district than he had. He only had 1/3 of it. They had the rest of it. And Mayor Daley at that time was for the other guy. And so his organization was helping the other guy. But I was out there and I could just feel the voters. And so I was cautiously optimistic.
And were you in the press? Like, were they talking a lot about you, or were you kind of somebody they weren't listening?
No. Chicago, that's too small for the Chicago media.
Got it. Okay.
Governor, they cover a lot. When I started running for Congress, they'd cover that. But this is too small.
Okay.
It's 1/6 of a congressional district.
Got it.
But more than an aldermanic district. It's about 3 or 4 aldermanic, maybe 3 aldermanic wards. So, but other parts of wards are in it, different wards. And long and the short of it is, I felt cautiously optimistic. He thought we were going to lose based upon the turnout in the areas where the other ward bosses were. But I felt there was gentrification. I knew there was gentrification going on, and they were younger voters, and I was far younger than the other guy, the yuppie vote, right? And I felt like I was doing well with them. And sure enough, the first precinct came in, and it was in the base of former Congressman Dan Rostenkowski's area. And they were their incumbent was their guy. So he was against me, and they were powerful. But I only lost that precinct by maybe 20 votes. And right then, my father-in-law said, you won, because if we're only losing like that there, imagine what you're doing everywhere else. And sure enough, I won with 61% of the vote. It was really, really big. And I called my mother, and I said, Mama, I won. And she said, oh, son, she said, here's what she said to me. It's almost prophetic. She said to me, oh, son, I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. And only if your father was alive, he would be so proud of you. Now remember, son, always be for the people. Remember where you came from and be for the people. I said, I will, Mama, I will. And then she said to me, one more thing, son. I said, what's that, Mama? She said, be honest, son. Don't ever take bribes.
Wow.
Right? And I said, don't you worry, Mama, I won't do anything to dishonor you or the memory of my father. And then she said, do you think you can get Aunt Violet's son-in-law a job? Which is typical Chicago politics.
Right.